Step into the kind of silence that only exists miles from the nearest town, where state-mandated wilderness camps strip you of every comfort and leave you with nothing but the trees and the dark. These 4 students thought they were being taught resilience, but what they actually discovered was that something in those woods had been studying them far longer. Their voices, their fears, their silhouettes. When your headmaster calls, roll from outside your cabin, but you can see him standing rigidly behind the mess hall window 3 buildings away. You understand that the wilderness isn't just listening, it's learning to mimic, and that's when team building becomes survival. The state thought it was doing us a favor by sending us to Camp Ironwood for a mandatory social cohesion retreat, but the moment our bus passed the weathered wooden sign with its carved ironwood tree, I felt the weight of a million prying eyes, and the 5-mile dirt road that followed seemed to swallow every bar of signal until our phones became glossy black mirrors that reflected only our own anxious faces. We were 18, mostly strangers from different districts, and the faculty chaperones, Ms. Keene and Mr. Dorsey, kept repeating the same phrase, like a liturgy. This is a technology-free zone. Learn to trust your instincts and each other. Our cabin, Birch Lodge, sat at the very edge of the camp perimeter, pressed up against a tree line so dense that sunset at 4:47 p.m. in late October felt like being sealed inside a jar of ink. The first 2 nights were ordinary discomfort, splinters, cold bunks, the distant howl of what I convinced myself was just a coyote. Then, on night 3, I woke to the sound of a fist rapping softly against our door 3 knocks. A pause, 3 more, and a voice I knew too well. The reedy, half-apologetic tone of Mr. Dorsey, calling lights out inspection. Boys, open up, just need to check bunks. Royce, my bunkmate, was already sitting up, hand on the latch. When I grabbed his wrist and pointed to the window above his bed, through the fogged glass across the wide central clearing, the counselor's lodge was lit, and standing perfectly framed in the yellow square of its window, unmoving, was Mr. Dorsey, his silhouette unmistakable with that slight hitch in his left shoulder. Facing our cabin, the knocking came again, harder, and the voice shifted, dropping the politeness and picking up something wet and guttural. "Caleb. Open the door, Caleb. I can smell the fear on your breath, and it tastes like the pulp of an unripe crabapulsoar. Green, waiting to be split." That's when I noticed the smell myself, a sudden invasive sweetness, like overripe fruit and damp earth. The temperature around the doorframe plummeted until a film of ice spider webbed across the wood. Royce slowly retracted his hand, and we all just stared at the knob as it began to turn. The mechanism groaning under the slow, deliberate torque of something testing how much pressure a locked metal core could take before it simply gave up. I don't remember deciding to speak. I remember my mouth forming the words, "We see you, you're not him." And the turning stopped, replaced by a low, guttural chuckle that vibrated up from the floorboards and rattled the nails in the wall. For the rest of the night, we huddled in the farthest corner, listening to the sound of something pacing just outside the thin pine planks, occasionally dragging what sounded like a cluster of wet leaves or fingers across the grain. And when the sun finally bled into the sky, we found the door unlocked and standing wide open. The camp counselor still in his lodge, dead asleep and swearing he hadn't moved all night. His boots still caked with yesterday's mud, and just beyond our threshold, a single perfect footprint pressed into the frosted human foot that had 6 elongated toes, each one ending in a sharp, claw-like impression that pointed not toward the lodge but into the black mouth of the forest. Granite Peak Retreat was supposed to be the answer to the school district's new environmental citizenship requirement, and I'll be the first to admit I was excited for a week away from my chronically overbearing parents. But the excitement curdled the moment our guide, a ranger named Etta with tattooed vines wrapping her forearms, handed out the silence contracts, actual legal-looking documents that stated we would forfeit all verbal communication between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m., citing the need to observe nocturnal acoustic ecology without human interference. My bunkmate, a quiet girl named Priya, with silver eyeliner, just shrugged and signed. But I felt a cold prickle at the base of my skull because the contract's fine print included a clause about auditory mimicry naturally occurring in the North Cascade Range, which the retreat cannot control, and for which participants assume full psychological risk. We were 12 girls in a single A-frame chalet, surrounded by nothing but granite spires and ancient pines that seemed to lean in whenever we whispered. And the first night of enforced silence was almost peaceful, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own blood moving in. I woke to the distinct, crisp sound of Etta's voice, exactly the way she'd spoken during our daytime navigation drill, saying, "Maya, your compass bearing is off by 14 degrees. You're walking straight into the Basin trap." My brain, foggy with sleep, tried to place it as a radio or a recording, but the voice had the exact cadence, the same slight Pacific Northwest lilt, and it came from directly beneath the floorboards, as if the ground itself had swallowed Etta and was now regurgitating her words. I sat up and looked around. Priya was gripping her pillow, eyes wide, and across the room, at least 4 other girls were staring at the floor. Because the voice continued, "The Basin trap is where the snowmelt creates unstable ground. Once you sink, the weight of your pack will keep you under. And the water is so cold it feels like burning, Maya, like all your nerve endings firing at once before they shut down forever." That was when I realized Etta had never said any of that during our training. Etta only mentioned a basic compass correction, and the voice was adding details it couldn't possibly know. Specific, terrifying details about hypothermia and the exact sensation of mud filling your lungs, all delivered with Etta's encouraging instructional tone. I bit down on my tongue so hard I tasted copper, remembering the contract's rule. But a girl named Charlotte broke first, screaming, "Shut up. Just shut up." And the voice instantly stopped, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence that felt like the air before lightning. Then, from outside, we heard Etta's real voice, thick with sleep and irritation, shouting from her private cabin 50 yards away. "Silence. Contract means silence. Anyone making noise loses their citizenship credit and gets latrine duty for the rest of the week." But we hadn't made the original noise, and when we looked down at the rustic floorboards, we saw that the wood grain in the center of the room was shifting, the lines reforming into a crude diagram that matched our topographical map, a top-down view of a basin labeled M, right where I'd been standing during compass practice. The next day, Etta dismissed it as group hysteria, but she avoided meeting my eyes, and when I asked her directly about the basin on the map, she went pale and said that area has been closed for 20 years. 9 campers drowned there when a sinkhole collapsed, and the official report claimed they heard voices guiding them in. That night, we all broke the contract, whispering in a huddle. I've never felt more watched in my life. Stillwater Basin wasn't even a real camp. It was a cluster of uninsulated shacks on the edge of a cypress swamp that the county had rented cheap because the state's Mandatory Resilience and Leadership Initiative required at least 72 hours of unsupervised group shelter construction. But our chaperone, Coach Haver, got a stomach flu so violent he had to be driven to the nearest clinic 12 miles away, leaving 6 of us, me, Dawson, Kylie, the twins, Marcus, and Malcolm, and a transfer kid named Ely alone with a satellite phone we were expressly forbidden to use and a single instruction: build a weatherproof lean-to before sundown. The swamp wasn't scenic. It was a flooded graveyard of bald cypress and black water that smelled like compost and secrets. And the moment Coach's taillights vanished, I heard the first mimic, a perfect copy of Kylie's nervous laugh, high and fluttery, coming from a cluster of cattails about 30 yards into the murk. Dawson, who was always performing fearlessness, chucked a stick at it and shouted, "Nice try," local yokels. And for a few hours, we managed to convince ourselves it was just an echo or some kind of bird. But by late afternoon, the swamp was talking and our voices constantly Marcus's distinct. "Untitled hey. Wait up." Malcolm's quieter. "I don't think this is right." Eli's soft. It's almost an audible hum of a song none of us recognized. We'd given up on the lean-to, and we're just trying to keep the fire going when the voices began layering. A chorus of our own words stitched together into new sentences. "Tanner, the lean-to is wrong. You'll freeze tonight if you don't come this way. The deeper water is warmer, and the mud feels like blankets. Let us show you." I'd been holding the map. And with a jolt, I saw that the path the voices were describing led exactly to a spot labeled thermal vents danger, unstable substrate, a detail Coach had specifically warned us about. Eli, who hadn't spoken a dozen words all trip, suddenly stood up and started walking toward the voice, his face slack and peaceful, and when I grabbed his arm, he turned and said in a tone that wasn't his but was my own mom's, the exact way she'd call me in for dinner when I was 8. "Tanner Michael Holt. You let go right now, or you'll regret it until the ground takes you back." I released him from pure shock. In the moment his foot touched the black water's edge, the entire swamp went dead silent. The kind of silence that physically hurt your eardrums, and a shape rose from the muck, not a person, but a collection of cypress knees and sphagnum moss that had arranged itself into a rough approximation of a human form, with Kylie's laugh spilling from a hollow where its mouth should have been, and Marcus's voice begging for help from its chest cavity. We all screamed, which broke whatever trance Eli was in, and we scrambled backward, grabbing him, and just before we lost sight of the thing, it spoke with Coach Haver's booming baritone, cheerful and paternal. "Boys, the exercise is over. Come on out, you've passed." But Coach didn't get back until sunrise. And when he did, he found all 7 of us. We'd counted Eli twice in our panic, realizing only later that we'd left with 6 and arrived with 6. But the number on the sign-in sheet now read 7, huddled on top of the rickety shack roof. And Eli kept saying, "It learned my grandmother's voice." I don't even remember what she sounded like until now. Whispering Pines had a reputation even before the States. Holistic adolescent development program made it mandatory for every junior in our county. And that reputation was mostly jokes about kids getting poison ivy in weird places. But what the brochures left out was that the camp was built directly on top of the foundational remains of an 1800 sanatorium that had once specialized in acoustic therapy, a fancy term for locking tuberculosis patients in resonance chambers where their coughs and cries were amplified and supposedly transmuted into healing frequencies. I was assigned a hemlock cabin with 3 other girls and our counselor, a grad student named Lacey with unblinking eye contact. Spent the first evening explaining that we'd be participating in a listening exercise where we'd wear blindfolds and map the soundscape of the forest for 2 hours before bed. The blindfolds were thick, padded silk that sealed completely. And within minutes of sitting on the cold ground, I heard what I can only describe as the forest breathing, a rhythmic, wet exhalation that seemed to come from every direction at once. Lacey's voice, calm and trained, guided us. Identify the source. If you hear a sound that resembles a human voice, do not respond verbally. Record it mentally and we'll debrief at sunrise. Almost immediately, I heard my little brother's laugh, an unmistakable giggle of Benny, who died of meningitis 3 years prior, and my heart clenched because it was so perfect, so full of the exact hiccup he used to have, and I felt tears soaking into the silk. Then I heard my own voice slightly higher, as if recorded, saying, "Benny's not really here, June. It's just the pines, you know," they whisper. That's why it's called Whispering Pines. It was something I might have logically thought, but I hadn't spoken it. And the voice came from about 4 feet to my left, where I knew no one was sitting. The debrief never happened because at some point during the 2 hours, the entire cabin's power cut, and when we ripped off our blindfolds, we found that Lacey was standing rigidly at the edge of the clearing. Facing the old sanatorium foundation, a moss-covered stone rectangle land, repeating a single phrase over and over in a flat, needle-like tone. "The resonance is correct. The resonance is correct. The patients are listening. The patients are waiting for the final note." She wouldn't respond to her name. And when another girl tried to touch her, Lacey's head swiveled 180 degrees with a wet popping sound not broken. Just repositioned it. Her mouth shaped my brother's laugh. But it was wrong. Stretched and slowed down until it became a gurgling cough that rattled the stones. We ran for the director's lodge, but every path we took circled us back to the same foundation. And each time we passed it, another one of our voices was added to the chorus, emerging from the earth snippets of conversations we'd had years ago. Secrets we'd never spoken aloud, all mixed with the wet crackle of diseased lungs. By the time the sun came up, Lacey was gone. And the official explanation was a transient dissociative fugue. But I later found a photo of the 1902 sanatorium staff. And there, in the front row, was a nurse with the exact same unblinking eyes and vine-patterned blouse as our counselor. And on the back of the photo, in perfect, modern ballpoint pen, was written, "Session 143 complete. Subject Juniper Lee provided the missing frequency." These stories linger because they twist something familiar a field trip, a chaperone's voice, the safety of a group into a trap, and I think that's why we can't stop looking over our shoulders long after the fire dies down. If you've ever been on a school trip that felt just a little too isolated, or heard your name in a voice you couldn't quite place, drop A in the comments and tell me about it. I read every single one, and the best personal encounters might just get featured in a future compilation. Your subscription tells the algorithm that these real-life horror narratives matter. When you hit that bell, you make sure you never miss a single transmission from the edge of the map. Share this video with someone who still thinks summer camp was all s'mores and sing-alongs. Let's see if they still feel that way after dark. Thank you for spending this time in the silence with me. Stay observant, stay close to your group, and I'll see you in the next story.